The year was 1944. The skies above Europe were filled with the deadly dance fighters locked in aerial combat, bombers carving their paths of destruction, and yet, beneath it all, a different kind of warfare was unfolding. The P-47 Thunderbolt, once a high-flying fighter, was being transformed into something few could have imagined. A ground attack machine that would go on to become a legend in the art of tank killing. But when the P-47 first took to the skies, it was viewed as little more than a heavy-hitting interceptor designed to dominate the skies at high altitudes. Its powerful Pratt & Whitney engine and rugged airframe made it a formidable opponent in dogfights. Yet, as the Allies pushed deeper into occupied Europe, a new battlefield emerged, one that would demand more from these flying behemoths. It was on the muddy fields of France, through the dense forests of Belgium, and amidst the chaos of the Battle of the Bulge, that the P-47 would prove its true worth. The Thunderbolt would take on a role few ever expected, transforming into a deadly ground attack aircraft capable of laying waste to German tanks, armor, and supply lines. But this was not an easy transition. The pilots who flew these machines were used to the adrenaline rush of aerial combat now. They would become the very instruments of destruction on the ground. They laughed at first, the skeptics and the critics. How could a heavy fighter, with its large frame and limited ground attack experience, take on the might of the German armored divisions? But as history would show, these pilots would not only answer the call, they would redefine what it meant to be a fighter pilot in World War II. This is the story of the P-47 pilots who turned into tank killers, a tale of innovation, bravery, and the incredible transformation of a war machine. In the mid-1930s, the United States Air Force was on the hunt for a new fighter. The growing threats from both the Axis powers and the burgeoning air forces in Europe demanded something bigger, more powerful, and capable of withstanding the rigors of combat. Thus, in 1939, the P-47 Thunderbolt was born. Designed by Republic Aviation, the P-47 was a far cry from the sleek, nimble fighters that were popular at the time. It was big, it was heavy, and it had a reputation for being tough. The design, under the guidance of Chief Engineer Alexander de Seversky, incorporated a massive radial engine, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, which provided the Thunderbolt with a monstrous amount of power. This brute force would become its hallmark, but it also came at the expense of maneuverability. The Thunderbolt's design was a testament to raw power. With a wingspan stretching 40 feet and a fuselage as wide as a tank's turret, it was built like a battleship in the sky. Its heavy armor plating could withstand damage that would bring other planes down, and it could carry the largest amount of armament ever seen on a single-engine fighter. The P-47's armament included 8 and 50 caliber Browning machine guns mounted in the wings, designed to tear through enemy aircraft like a hot knife through butter. But, despite its brute strength, the P-47 was originally designed to fight at high altitudes. Its primary role was to escort bombers over Germany, preventing Luftwaffe fighters from intercepting the Allied bombers. The early versions of the Thunderbolt were some of the first fighters to truly challenge the Luftwaffe in long-range combat. However, its bulky design and lack of agility made it a less-than-ideal dogfighter. It was built for a different kind of battle. Still, the P-47 showed promise. Pilots who had flown other fighters marveled at its survivability. Even after being riddled with bullets, the P-47 could still limp back home, a characteristic that would prove invaluable as the war raged on. But its transformation into a tank killer would only come when the Allies began pushing into occupied Europe, and new tactics were needed for a new kind of warfare. As the Allied forces advanced through France and into Belgium, the war on the ground became more brutal. The German Wehrmacht was retreating, but their tank divisions were still formidable, and the battlefield was quickly becoming a game of attrition. The air superiority that the Allies had achieved in the early years of the war was now being challenged by the German ability to regroup and fortify their positions. For the Allies, this meant one thing: the need to engage the enemy on a new level. The P-47, initially designed for air combat, would soon find itself in an entirely different kind of fight. While its primary mission had been to protect bombers, the need for close air support to assist ground troops was undeniable. In the chaos of battle, where every tank, every piece of artillery, and every entrenched position mattered, the P-47 had the firepower to change the tide of the conflict. The shift to ground attack missions was not without its challenges. The transition from dogfighting to tank busting required a completely new set of skills, tactics, and techniques. Pilots had to adjust their flying techniques, learning how to dive toward the target, pinpoint an armored tank or artillery position, and strike with deadly accuracy. The Thunderbolt's heavy construction, though not ideal for nimbleness, gave it an advantage in withstanding the damage that often accompanied close attack missions. Before pilots could take to the skies in these new roles, they underwent specialized training. They had to learn how to dive accurately, often flying at very low altitudes, sometimes mere feet from the ground. This demanded precision and an intimate knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities. The P-47's massive engine allowed for high-speed dives and quick pullouts, but such maneuvers required immense skill and confidence. In addition to dive bombing, pilots were also taught to employ strafing techniques, using their 50 caliber machine guns to target enemy tanks, supply vehicles, and infantry. The Thunderbolt, once considered a mere interceptor, was now being honed into a true ground attack beast. Pilots began to recognize the potential of the aircraft in this new role, and with a combination of sheer firepower and persistence, the P-47 began to make its mark in the mud and chaos of the battlefield. The Allies' push through France and into the heart of Germany brought with it new challenges. The German army had dug in and fortified key positions. But the P-47 was no longer just a fighter. It was a tool of destruction, capable of altering the course of battles in ways no one had initially expected. December 1944. The frigid winter winds howled through the Ardennes forest in Belgium, carrying the sound of distant artillery and the echo of the dying cries of a war-torn continent. The Germans, under Hitler's orders, had launched a last-ditch effort to break through the Allied lines and recapture Antwerp, the vital port that was a lifeline for Allied supplies. This would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by the United States during World War II. It was here, amid the frozen hell of the Ardennes, that the P-47 would prove its worth as a tank killer for the first time. As the German offensive pushed through the American defenses, the Allies desperately needed to slow the enemy's advance and disrupt their armor columns. The P-47 Thunderbolt, which had already been adapted for ground attack, was now thrown into the fray with urgency. The Battle of the Bulge was a test like no other for the P-47 pilots. These weren't high-altitude dogfights. No, this was a war fought inches above the snow-covered ground, with the fate of thousands of men hanging in the balance. The pilots had to navigate the challenging weather, thick clouds, and limited visibility. But despite the adverse conditions, the P-47 pilots soared into action, taking on German tanks and infantry with devastating precision. The German tanks, the feared Tiger and Panther models, had long been a symbol of Nazi military might, but the P-47 proved capable of taking them on. With its powerful, 50 caliber machine guns and the ability to carry bombs, the Thunderbolt could strike from a distance, strafing enemy armor from low altitudes. In the treacherous cold, the pilots of the P-47 fought bravely, flying in formation to pinpoint enemy tank positions, often diving straight into the heart of the German armored columns. These brave pilots risked their lives with each pass, knowing the danger of the terrain and the ferocity of the German tanks below. But despite the risk, they relentlessly pounded the German forces. In many cases, their efforts disrupted the German advance, causing chaos among the enemy ranks and buying precious time for the Allied infantry to regroup and push back. First-hand accounts from the pilots who flew these missions recount the harrowing experience. The cold was unbearable, but the heat of battle, the roar of machine guns, and the deafening explosions was something altogether different. In one account, a pilot recalls how a direct hit on a German tank caused the vehicle to explode in a brilliant fireball, lighting up the dark, frozen landscape. The pilots knew that their work wasn't just about destroying tanks. It was about shifting the momentum of the war in favor of the Allies. The Battle of the Bulge was a turning point in the war, and while many battles were fought on the ground, it was the P-47 pilots, with their daring tank-busting missions, who helped to ensure that the Allies held their ground. Their role in this pivotal battle cemented the Thunderbolt's reputation as a versatile and deadly weapon capable of both dominating the skies and wreaking havoc on the ground. While the P-47 Thunderbolt's transformation into a 7 ground attack weapon was nothing short of remarkable, it was the pilots who flew these machines that truly defined the aircraft's legacy as a tank killer. These were the brave men who took on the German war machine head-on, risking their lives to cripple the enemy's most powerful weapon, their tanks. Among these pilots were some of the most notable and daring aces of World War II, whose feats in the cockpit of the P-47 are legendary. Their skill, determination, and bravery would become the stuff of aviation folklore. Let's take a look at some of the pilots whose names would forever be associated with the Thunderbolt's ground attack success. Lieutenant Paul P. Douglas, Jr. One of the most famous P-47 pilots to earn a reputation as a tank killer was Lieutenant Paul P. Douglas, Jr. Serving with the 9th Air Force, Lieutenant Paul P. Douglas, Jr. Douglas was known for his relentless pursuit of German armor during the Allied push through France and Belgium. With his keen eye for spotting enemy positions from the air, he would dive into the heart of the enemy lines, machine guns blazing, hitting tanks with deadly accuracy. His efforts helped turn the tide in several crucial battles, and he became a celebrated ace among his peers. Douglas's success wasn't simply due to his flying skills. It was his understanding of the terrain and the tactics required to take down tanks that set him apart. In one of his most notable missions, he single-handedly destroyed 4 German tanks during a low-level strafing run. For his actions, he was awarded numerous commendations, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, and his legend only grew as the war progressed. Colonel Virgil K. Maroney, another ace whose name became synonymous with tank killing, was Colonel Virgil K. Maroney, known for his leadership and daring missions. Cole. Maroney led his squadron with distinction throughout the war. A veteran of the Battle of the Bulge, Maroney's squadron became renowned for its precision strikes against German armor. As the other to WWII's Allies advanced, Maroney's skills in close air support were unmatched. He was instrumental in training his pilots to use the P-47's firepower effectively, teaching them how to target tank engines, fuel tanks, and weak spots. One of Maroney's most famous missions took place during the final days of the war in Europe, when his squadron successfully eliminated a large German tank battalion that was threatening to break through Allied lines. His quick thinking and ability to coordinate air support with ground forces helped secure the victory. Colonel Maroney's legacy as a tank killer lives on in the annals of World War II aviation history. Capt. Francis H. C. Miller. Captain Francis H. C. Miller, another prominent pilot in the 9th Air Force, was also credited with the destruction of several German tanks. Miller's success lay in his ability to take on targets that other pilots might have avoided. He had a gift for calculating the perfect attack run, allowing him to hit tanks from angles that minimized the risk to himself while maximizing the damage to the enemy. His skill in using the P-47's firepower, combined with his quick reflexes, made him a feared and respected adversary in the skies and on the ground. One of Miller's most successful missions came during an attack on a German armored column in northern France. Despite adverse weather conditions and fierce enemy resistance, Miller's squadron destroyed multiple tanks, leaving a trail of wreckage behind them. It was a textbook example of how P-47 pilots could dominate the battlefield when used in the right hands. Miller's contribution to tank busting was invaluable, and his impact on the war was far-reaching. These pilots and many others like them were not just skilled aviators. They were the embodiment of innovation, adaptability, and courage. They took a machine designed for one purpose and turned it into an instrument of war that would shape the outcome of the conflict. Their stories are not just about tank killing. They are about the unwavering spirit of men who face the greatest danger with unyielding resolve and a willingness to push the limits of what was possible. As the war in Europe came to a close in 1945, the P-47 Thunderbolt had already secured its place in history as one of the most versatile and effective fighters of World War II. The transformation from high-altitude bomber escort to tank-busting ground attack aircraft had not only proven the adaptability of the aircraft, but had redefined the role of fighter pilots in modern warfare. The Thunderbolt's lasting impact on military aviation was profound, and its legacy continues to influence fighter design and tactics even today. The success of the P-47 inches, its ground attack role demonstrated the importance of multi-role versatility in combat aircraft. During World War II, aircraft were often specialized for specific missions: fighters for aerial combat, bombers for strategic bombing, and ground attack planes for close support. However, the P-47's ability to excel in both air-to-air combat and ground attack roles shattered the traditional model. It showed that a single aircraft could take on multiple roles and perform each with exceptional effectiveness. The P-47's durability was also a key factor in its legacy. Pilots who flew the Thunderbolt often spoke of the aircraft's ability to take hits and keep flying. Unlike lighter, more fragile fighters, the P-47's robust construction and heavy armor allowed it to survive damage that would have grounded other planes. This reputation for toughness made it a favorite among pilots, who knew that if they were shot down, the P-47 would give them a fighting chance to make it back home. But the Thunderbolt's legacy wasn't just about its role in the skies. The P-47's ground attack capabilities revolutionized the way air support was used on the battlefield. The Thunderbolt's ability to take on tanks, armored vehicles, and infantry changed the course of numerous battles. It provided Allied ground forces with the close air support they needed to break through heavily fortified positions and disrupt enemy armor formations. The Thunderbolt became an invaluable tool for commanders who knew that air superiority wasn't just about controlling the skies, it was about supporting the troops on the ground. The tactical innovations that came from the P-47's ground attack role also had long-lasting effects on future military strategy. The emphasis on close air support using aircraft to strike at enemy ground forces and infrastructure became a cornerstone of modern warfare. Today, close air support remains a vital component of military strategy, and aircraft designed for this role still bear the influence of the P-47's pioneering efforts. The pilots who flew the P-47 during its tank-busting days would later reflect on the legacy they left behind. They had taken an aircraft that was initially seen as a lumbering fighter and transformed it into a symbol of power, precision, and adaptability. Their courage and innovation on the battlefield were an inspiration to future generations of aviators. And as the world moved into the jet age, the P-47's legacy would continue to influence the design of new fighter aircraft, which would take on even more versatile and deadly roles. While the P-47 was eventually retired from active service in the late 1940s, its impact on military aviation remained. The Thunderbolt set the stage for the development of aircraft that would dominate future conflicts, including the jet-powered fighters that came in the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds. But even as technology evolved, the lessons learned from the P-47's ground attack success would continue to shape air combat strategies for decades to come. The P-47 Thunderbolt's legacy as a tank killer was one of many chapters in its storied career, but it remains one of the most defining aspects of its contribution to the war effort. It was a weapon that struck fear into the hearts of the enemy, a tool that shaped the course of history, and a symbol of the pilots who transformed it into something far greater than its original design. As the war in Europe drew to a close, the world celebrated the end of a conflict that had ravaged nations, claimed millions of lives, and altered the course of history. But for the P-47 pilots who had turned their aircraft into tank killers, the war was not just about victory on the battlefield. It was about something far more personal, the recognition of their ingenuity, their bravery, and their transformation of a humble fighter into one of the deadliest weapons of war. These men were not the ones celebrated in grand parades, or the ones whose stories would become the most famous. Instead, They were the unsung heroes, the pilots who flew into the heart of battle, risking their lives to take down tanks and armor that seemed unstoppable. They were the ones who adapted, who saw a challenge and embraced it, and who transformed the P-47 from a high-flying interceptor into a ground attack legend. Their stories, often overshadowed by the more glamorous dogfights and strategic bombings of the war, are a testament to the adaptability and resourcefulness that defined the American fighter pilots of World War II. They weren't just following orders, they were rewriting the rules of air combat and demonstrating what was possible when innovation met necessity. It wasn't just the P-47 itself that earned its place in history, but the pilots who flew it. They are the ones who took the Thunderbolt to the very limits of its capabilities. They proved that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, determination and skill could turn the tide of battle. Through their efforts, the P-47 became more than just an aircraft. It became a symbol of resilience, versatility, and the unyielding spirit of those who flew it. The legacy of the P-47 pilots, who turned into tank killers, lives on. Their courage and commitment continue to inspire modern air forces, reminding us all that in warfare, it is not always the biggest or the most advanced weapon that wins the day. Sometimes it's the willingness to adapt, to fight with everything you have, and to keep pushing forward, no matter the odds. As we reflect on the role of the P-47 Thunderbolt in World War II, we are reminded that history is not just made by the famous battles and iconic aircraft, it's made by the men who flew them, who fought in the mud and the chaos of war, and who changed the course of history through their daring actions. The Thunderbolt, and the pilots who flew it, will always be remembered as true pioneers of air combat. The P-47 may have been a machine of war, but it was the pilots who truly brought it to life. If you loved the video, please like, subscribe, and share the video. And if you have any opinions on this, comment below.